Imagine this scenario. It's, let's say, a Tuesday morning. You're sitting at your kitchen table, maybe with a cup of coffee, and you're just flipping through the local paper.
The New Haven Register, maybe?
Yeah, exactly. And you're scanning past the usual stuff, used cars, apartments for rent.
Mm-hmm.
And then this little ad, it just catches your eye.
It's for volunteers.
For volunteers.
Yes.
It says, a study of memory and learning. And it's at Yale University.
Which already gives it a certain weight.
It does. And it pays $4 for an hour of your time, plus car fare.
And you have to remember, this is the early 1960s. So $4, I mean, it's not a fortune, but it's not nothing either. It's a nice lunch.
Right. So it seems harmless. You think, hey, why not? I can help out science, make a few bucks.
Totally normal thought, so you decide to go.
You get to the university, and well, it's Yale. It's got the imposing Gothic buildings, the ivy on the walls, the whole 9 yards.
You find the psychology lab and the atmosphere. It's a little heavy, right? It's got that academic smell of old paper and maybe ozone from the equipment.
For sure. And you walk in, and you meet two people. The first is the researcher.
And we really need to pause on this guy's appearance because it is so important to what happens next.
Right.
The researcher is just the picture of authority. He's got the stern look, he's not smiling, and he's holding a clipboard.
The universal symbol of, I'm in charge and I'm evaluating you.
Exactly. And the most important part, he's wearing a gray technician's lab coat. And that coat, it's not just clothing. It's a costume.
It's a uniform.
It's a uniform that screams science, objectivity, truth. It tells you, without saying a word, I know what I'm doing, trust me.
Okay, so that's person one, and then there's the second guy in the room.
Yeah, another volunteer, just like you. Let's call him Mr. Wallace. He's this mild-mannered accountant, maybe 50 years old.
He seems like a perfectly nice, average guy. A little nervous, maybe.
Yeah.
Just like you were.
You make a little small talk, about the weather or parking, and then the researcher explains the experiment.
He says, we are studying the effects of punishment on learning.
Which, I mean, that sounds plausible. It's a real thing in psychology.
Right. So he explains that one of you is going to be the teacher and the other one will be the learner.
And this is it. This is the moment the trap kind of snaps shut, but you have no idea.
None at all. You draw these little slips of paper from a hat to decide who's who. You unfold yours. It says teacher.
And Mr. Wallace, the accountant, he unfolds his and he gets learner.
So far, so good. You think, okay, cool. I'm the one in charge here. I'm not the one getting tested.
Or so you think.
So the researcher, he takes Mr. Wallace into the next room, and you can see through the door he's strapping this poor guy into a chair. It looks serious.
Yeah, he rolls up Mr. Wallace's sleeve. He's pasting electrodes onto his skin with this gray paste. It looks very technical, very scientific.
And you, the teacher, you're starting to feel a little bit of concern. You ask, hey, are these shocks? Are they dangerous?
A perfectly reasonable question.
Now, the researcher just says very calmly, although the shocks can be extremely painful, they cause no permanent tissue damage.
That phrase right there, extremely painful. I mean, that should be your cue to just get up and walk out the door.
That's a huge red flag. He's admitting you were about to inflict suffering.
But you don't. You go back into the main room and you sit down in front of this massive instrument panel.
It looks like something out of an old sci-fi movie. A Cold War bunker, maybe. It's got 30 switches, all in a row.
And they start at 15 volts. That one is labeled slight shock, and they just keep going up in 15-volt steps.
And the labels, they get more and more ominous as you go up the board.
Oh, yeah. You go past moderate shock, strong shock, intense shock.
And then you start seeing things like extreme intensity shock and danger, severe shock.
And then at the very end, the last two switches don't even have a word. They're just marked with XXX.
Right. Just in case you missed the memo, XXX is pretty much the universal symbol for poison, death, do not touch this.
Absolutely. It's a clear warning.
So your job, he explains, is simple. You read a list of word pairs to Mr. Wallace over an intercom. Blue box, nice day. Stuff like that.
And then you test him. If he gets it right, great. You move on. If he gets it wrong, you flip a switch.
And this is the rule. For every single mistake, you have to go one step higher on the voltage. Start at 15, then 30, then 45, and so on.
At first, it's almost boring. It feels like a game. Mr. Wallace, he gets a few right, gets a few wrong. You give him the little zaps.
15 volts is nothing. It's like a little tickle. 30 volts, maybe a static shock from a doorknob.
But Mr. Wallace, he's not very good at this memory game. He keeps making mistakes. So you're climbing up that board, 75 volts, 90 volts, 105.
And at 105 volts, for the first time, you hear something from the other room. A grunt. A little sharp intake of breath.
You probably look over at the researcher, right?
You do, and he doesn't even look up from his clipboard. He just makes a note and nods. So you ask the next question. Wrong answer. 120 volts.
And now what happens?
Now Mr. Wallace shouts. You can hear it clearly. Hey, this really hurts.
Okay, so your heart rate is probably going up now. This isn't a game anymore. You are actually hurting a stranger.
You keep going. 150 volts. And Mr. Wallace shouts loud and clear through the wall. That's all. Get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble. My heart's bothering me now. I refuse to go on.
Okay, let's just pause there. Put yourself in that chair. A man is screaming. He's talking about a heart condition. He is revoking his consent. What do you do?
I stop. Obviously I stop. I turn to the guy in the lab coat and I say, we're done here. I'm not killing an accountant over a memory test. This is over.
That's what we all believe we would do. That's what makes sense. But in this scenario, you turn to the researcher and he doesn't yell. He doesn't threaten you. He just speaks very calmly.
What does he say?
He has 4 standard prods. The first one is just, please continue.
And if you say no, if you say, but he's screaming.
Then he says, the experiment requires that you continue.
But he says he has a heart condition.
It is absolutely essential that you continue.
Okay, and if I still refuse?
The last one is, you have no other choice. You must go on.
But that's a lie. You have no other choice. Of course I have a choice. I can stand up and walk out of the room.
You absolutely can. But the question is, do you? And the data from this scenario, it suggests you don't. You turn back to the machine, you ask the next question, he gets it wrong, 180 volts.
And he screams, I can't stand the pain.
210 volts, 240. He's screaming in agony now. 270 volts. It's what the original text described as an agonized scream.
And you're not okay. You're sweating, you're trembling, you're probably biting your lip. You hate this.
You're looking at the researcher, you're pleading with your eyes, but the man in the gray coat just says, continue. So you hit 300 volts.
And at 300 volts, Mr. Wallace screams that he won't answer anymore. He's done. He's going on strike.
And the researcher tells you, trade a non-answer as a wrong answer. Shock him again.
So 315 volts, 330. You hear screams, and then nothing. Silence.
You ask the next question, no answer. You deliver 345 volts, silence.
360 volts, silence. You keep going all the way up, 450 volts. You are pulling the XX switch on a man who has been silent for a long, long time.
For all you know, you are electrocuting a corpse. And you are doing it because a stranger with a clipboard told you it was essential.
Okay, so take a breath. That's a horror movie. That's a nightmare.
It's history. And as a lot of you listening probably know, this isn't a hypothetical. This was the famous experiment conducted by Stanley Milgram at Yale.
But here's the twist. The twist that matters for our deep dive today.
The learner, Mr. Wallace, he was an actor. He never got a single shock.
The screams of pain, the heart condition, the banging on the wall, the silence. It was all a recording, pre-recorded on a tape player.
The only person in that room being studied was the teacher, the person pressing the button. The experiment was never about memory.
It was about us.
It was about answering one single terrifying question. How much suffering will an ordinary person inflict on a total stranger just because an authority figure tells them to?
And that question is what we are deep diving into today. The topic is authority. We're going to be exploring the source material from Robert Cialdini's research on influence, and we're focusing on this idea of directed deference.
We're going to try to unpack why our brains seem to be, hardwired to obey. How simple symbols, like a lab coat or a title, can basically hack our brains and get us to bypass our own logic.
And most importantly, how we can spot this happening and, how to defend ourselves against this kind of blind obedience. Because the results of that experiment, they were not what anyone expected.
Not even close. Before Milgram even ran the study, he knew it was a pretty dark concept. So he wanted to get a baseline. He wanted to know what people thought would happen.
He asked around.
And he didn't just ask random people. He went to the so-called experts. He surveyed 39 psychiatrists. He asked professors at Yale. He asked graduate students.
And he laid out the whole scenario for them. The screams, the heart condition, all of it.
The entire script. And he asked them, how far will the average person go? At what point do they stop?
And I'm guessing they had a little more faith in humanity than the results would later show.
A lot more. They were pretty much unanimous. They predicted that almost everyone would stop the second the victim shouted, "I refuse to go on." That's at 150 volts.
Okay, so they thought people would stop When the screaming started and the guy demanded to be released?
Exactly. And they predicted that only a tiny pathological fringe, we're talking maybe 1 or 2%, would go all the way to 450 volts.
So you'd have to be a literal sadist,
Yeah,
a psychopath.
that's what they thought. One group of psychiatrists predicted only 1 person in 1,000 would do it.
Yeah.
They just thought that level of cruelty was basically impossible for a normal person.
So the expert consensus was normal people stop, only monsters go to the end, and then reality hit.
And reality was like a sledgehammer to the field of psychology because in the actual experiment, it wasn't 1%. It wasn't 10%.
What was it?
It was about 65%.
85.
Roughly 2/3 of the subjects. 2 out of every 3 people pulled every single switch all the way up to the 450-volt XXX mark.
Even after the victim had gone completely silent.
Even then, these were ordinary people. Engineers, teachers, laborers, salesmen, people who went to church. Polite people. And they kept pressing the button.
There's a detail in the source material that's just, it's chilling.
I think I know the one you mean.
It says that not a single subject, not one of the 40 people in the first study, quit when the victim first demanded to be released.
Not one. Not when he begged. Not when his grunts turned into what Milgram called an agonized scream.
The first person didn't drop out until the 300-volt level. And even then, it was just a small handful.
Yeah, and that was when the victim was shouting that he wouldn't even answer anymore, and they still kept going.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around the why. My first instinct, and I think this is true for most people, is to say, okay, well, there must have been something wrong with those people.
Right, it's a defense mechanism. We want to distance ourselves from it. We say, oh, they must have all been men. Men are more aggressive, or they must have been uneducated, or just plain sadistic.
But Milgram's thought of that. He was incredibly thorough. He ran all these variations on the experiment to test those exact theories.
He did. For instance, he ran a version with female teachers. To see if a maternal instinct or maybe higher empathy would change the results.
And did it.
Not at all. The women did the exact same thing. The rate of obedience was virtually identical.
So empathy didn't save the victim. Okay. Well, what about the idea that they just didn't understand the danger? That they thought that was just being a bit dramatic?
Milgram covered that too. That's why he specifically added the heart condition part of the script.
To make the danger explicit.
Right. You've got a man screaming, "My heart's bothering me, let me out." I mean, you'd think that raising the stakes to a life or death medical emergency would stop it cold.
But it didn't change a thing. 65% still went to the maximum voltage.
It didn't, it's just so deeply disturbing.
So it's not gender, it's not ignorance of the danger.
What about the sadist theory? Did they just happen to get a bad batch of people who answered the ad? They check that too. The subjects were a standard cross-section of society. Different ages, different jobs, different education levels. Later personality tests on them showed they were psychologically normal.
No psychosis.
Nothing. As Milgram himself put it, they are you and me.
And that's the part that's so scary. Because if they are us, then we are capable of this. So what is the explanation?
Milgram's conclusion, and this is the core of our deep dive today, is that it all comes down to a deep-seated sense of duty to authority.
The culprit wasn't aggression.
Yeah.
It was the inability to defy the boss.
It was the man in the gray coat. The subjects just couldn't break that paralysis of obedience when the authority figure told them to continue.
And the source material points out something really crucial about their physical reactions. They were not enjoying this.
Oh, not at all. And that's the evidence that just destroys the sadism argument. These people were in agony themselves.
The transcripts describe them as trembling, sweating, stammering.
They were digging their fingernails into their own skin until they bled. They were biting their lips. Some of them even broke into these fits of nervous laughter.
That nervous laughter detail is so haunting. It's like their brain is just short-circuiting from the stress.
They hated what they were doing. They begged the research to let them stop. But when he calmly said, "Continue," they continued. It's like their moral compass was working just fine. They knew it was wrong, but their obedience switch was just jammed in the on position.
They outsource their morality to the guy with the clipboard. It's not, I'm doing this. It's, he is making me do this.
Precisely. They saw themselves as agents of the authority, not the authors of the action. And Milgram proved this with what I think is the most brilliant variation of the experiment. He did a role reversal.
What did that look like?
In one version, he had the researcher, the authority figure, tell the teacher to stop delivering the shocks. He'd say, "Okay, that's enough. The man is in too much pain." But then the victim, the actor in the other room, would bravely insist that they continue. He'd shout, "No, keep shocking me. I want to finish the experiment."
Oh, that's fascinating. So the victim is saying, shock me, but the boss is saying, don't shock him.
Exactly. And in that scenario, what do you think happened?
Well, if it was about aggression, they'd take the excuse, hey, he asked for it. But if it's about authority, they'd stop.
100% of the subjects stopped immediately. Not a single person gave another shock when it was just their fellow volunteer asking for it.
So that proves it. It's not about hurting people. It's about obeying the person in charge.
It is, and there was one more variation that really highlights this. Milgram brought in two researchers, two men in gray coats standing behind the teacher.
Okay, so double the authority.
But at a certain point, they start arguing with each other in front of the subject. One says, "We have to stop. The subject is clearly in pain." And the other one says, "No, the experiment requires that we continue."
So mom and dad are fighting. What did the subjects do?
They froze. The source describes it as a kind of tragicomic befuddlement. Their eyes were just darting back and forth between the two researchers.
They were looking for the real boss.
They were begging them to agree on a single command. They were saying, "Wait, which is it?" One says stop, one says go.
And when they couldn't figure it out,
The spell was broken. Without a clear, unified authority figure to obey, every single subject followed their own conscience and stopped the shocks.
that is a critical insight. Authority's power depends on it being unified and clear. If you can introduce dissent or confusion, the whole thing falls apart.
That's it exactly. Milgram said the number one finding of the whole study was just the extreme willingness of adults to go to almost any lengths on the command of an authority.
And while the lab was a controlled setting, we see this exact same dynamic play out in the real world.
Yeah.
With, absolutely devastating consequences.
Yeah, this isn't just about history or war crimes trials. It happens today. And the source brings up the story of S. Brian Wilson.
This is a really tough story, but it's so important for understanding the real-world stakes.
It is. This was in California back in 1987. Brian Wilson was a Vietnam vet turned peace activist. He was protesting U.S. military shipments to Nicaragua.
And this was a non-violent protest, right?
Completely. He and two other men decided to protest by lying down on the railroad tracks at a naval weapons station.
And it wasn't a surprise. They told the authorities they were going to do it.
They did. They notified the Navy and the railroad officials 3 days in advance. On the day, they were clearly visible. Wearing bright clothes, they were confident the train would stop.
Because, common sense says you don't run over people lying on the tracks if you can see them from a distance.
That is the logical assumption. But the civilian train crew, they had been given their orders.
And the orders were,
Do not stop.
oh no.
So even though they could see the protesters from 600 feet away, plenty of time to brake, they didn't even slow down. They kept coming.
Two of the men got out of the way, but Wilson?
Wilson wasn't fast enough. The train ran over him. It severed both of his legs below the knee.
That's just horrific.
And it actually gets worse. The Navy medical corpsmen who were on the scene, they refused to treat him. They wouldn't even let him be taken in their ambulance.
Why on earth not?
Because they hadn't been ordered to. They literally stood by while a man was bleeding out. It was bystanders, including Wilson's own wife and son, who had to try to stop the bleeding until a private ambulance finally arrived 45 minutes later.
It's the Milgram experiment in real life, but with a train instead of an electric shock generator.
And Wilson survived, and his reaction is just, it's incredibly telling. He didn't blame the train crew.
It didn't.
No, he'd served in Vietnam, so he understood the mindset. He said, they were just doing what I did in Nam. They were following orders. They're the fall guys. He blamed the system that demanded that kind of blind obedience.
But the crew, they didn't feel the same way about him.
No. And this is the part of the story that's almost impossible to believe. The train crew filed a lawsuit against Brian Wilson.
They sued the man they ran over.
They did. They asked for punitive damages for the humiliation, mental anguish, and physical stress they suffered because he hadn't let them carry out their orders without incident.
Let me get this straight. They sued him because he made them feel bad about following orders to run him over.
That's it. They felt victimized. They felt that their role as obedient employees had been challenged, and that was traumatic for them. They didn't see themselves as responsible for severing his legs. They were just good employees doing their job.
This gets to the deeper question then. Why are we like this? Why is this obedience to authority program running so deep in our brains? We all like to think of ourselves as independent free thinkers.
But the evidence suggests we're anything but. And, we have to look at the origins. This isn't an accident. For most of human history, it's been essential for survival.
A society with a clear authority structure has a huge advantage.
A huge advantage. It allows for complex things like resource production, trade, defense, social control. Without it, you have anarchy.
Right, the source brings up Thomas Hobbes. Life without authority is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short.
Exactly. If everyone argues about every single decision, you can't build a city, you can't run a hospital, you can't defend yourself. So from the day we're born, we are trained that obedience is right and disobedience is wrong.
It starts with our parents. Listen to your mother, then your teachers.
Then the police, then your boss, then the government. It's reinforced at every single level of society. And religion plays a huge part too.
The source mentions the story of Abraham and Isaac from the Bible.
Which is the ultimate test of obedience. God orders Abraham to take his beloved son, march him up a mountain, and kill him as a sacrifice.
With no explanation given. Just do it.
And Abraham is willing to go through with it. He literally raises the dagger. And because he was willing to obey without question, he passes the test, and an angel stops him at the last second.
The lesson there isn't don't kill your children. The lesson is if the ultimate authority tells you to do something terrible and irrational, you do it.
Precisely. The morality of the action is irrelevant. The only thing that matters is the command from the higher authority. And so we have this deep, deep cultural programming. And to be fair, most of the time, it works for us.
That's the paradox, isn't it? 99% of the time, listening to your doctor or your accountant or the pilot of your plane is the smart move.
Of course. They have more information, more expertise. It's a mental shortcut. We don't have to become experts in everything. We call this click-whir behavior.
Click the trigger happens, the authority speaks. Whir, the automatic response kicks in, and we obey.
But the problem is when we stop thinking altogether, when we switch over to autopilot.
And that's when you get these terrible errors. The source brings up a study about medication errors in hospitals being caused by this mindless deference.
Right. The boss, the doctor, makes a mistake, and nobody down the chain of command questions it because he's the boss.
Which brings us to the story of the rectal earache. This anecdote from the source is, well, you can't forget it.
It is the perfect, if slightly horrifying, example of click-whir obedience gone wrong.
So set it up for us.
Okay, so a doctor needs to prescribe ear drops for a patient who has an infection in his right ear. But instead of writing out right ear on the prescription pad, the doctor abbreviates it. He writes place in R ear. R-ear.
Okay, I see where this is going.
The nurse on duty picks up the prescription. And she doesn't read it as right ear. She reads it as rear.
No.
Oh, yes. So she promptly takes the patient and administers the required number of eardrops into the patient's anus.
And neither of them question this. The patient didn't say, excuse me, my ear infection is up here.
That is the whole point. Obviously, putting eardrops in someone's rectum makes zero anatomical sense. But because a legitimate authority, the doctor, had given the order, the professional intelligence of the nurse and just the basic common sense of the patient completely shut down.
They weren't analyzing the request. They were just responding to the authority.
Exactly. And that vulnerability brings us to the next big part of our deep dive, the symbols of authority. Because this is where it gets really tricky. We aren't just vulnerable to actual legitimate authority.
We're vulnerable to the appearance of authority.
Connotation, not content. If you can fake the symbols, you can get the obedience. And this is the bread and butter of con artists.
The source breaks this down into three main types of symbols: titles, clothes, and trappings. Let's start with titles.
Titles are incredibly powerful. They can be very hard to earn. Getting a PhD or an MD takes years, but they're the easiest symbol to just fake. You just have to put a label on yourself.
There's a great example of this from old school advertising with the actor Robert Young.
Ah, the Sanka commercial.
Yeah.
Yes. For anyone who doesn't remember, Robert Young was a famous actor, but he was most famous for playing a doctor on TV named Marcus Welby, MD.
So he wasn't a doctor, but he played one on TV.
Right. And Sanka hired him to sell decaffeinated coffee. He'd put on the suit, use that calm, doctorly voice, and warn people about the dangers of caffeine.
And it actually worked. People bought it.
It worked incredibly well, sold a ton of coffee. Because in the public's mind, he was a doctor. The title MD was mentally attached to his face. Objectively, it's insane to take medical advice from an actor, but the symbol overrode the logic.
And titles don't just affect our judgment. They can literally change how we physically perceive people. There was that study in Australia about height.
This is one of my favorites. It's so weird. A visitor from Cambridge University was introduced to 5 different classes of students, but in each class, he was given a different title.
So to one class, he was introduced as just a student.
Right. To the next, a demonstrator, then a lecturer, senior lecturer, and finally to the last class, a professor.
And after he left, they asked the students to estimate his height.
They did. And with every single step up that status ladder, the man grew in perceived height. When he was introduced as a professor, the students, on average, perceived him as being 2.5 inches taller than when he was introduced as a student.
Wow. So we literally look up to authority figures.
We literally do. And you see this in the animal kingdom, right? In a lot of species, size equals dominance. So animals will puff up their fur or arch their backs to look bigger. We humans just substitute fancy titles for puffed up fur.
It reminds me of that anecdote in the source material about the author's friend, the professor who has to lie about his job in bars.
Right. He says that whenever he travels, if he tells someone he's a professor, the whole conversation just dies.
People get all stiff and respectful and just agree with everything he says.
Yeah, he says, I'm the same guy I was 5 minutes ago, but the title just completely changes the dynamic. So now he just tells people he does something else so he can have a normal conversation.
That's amazing.
Huh.
So what do? I'm a professional dog walker, just to keep it real.
It's a defense mechanism against our deference.
Okay, so that's titles. Let's move to the second symbol, clothes. This is all about the power of the uniform.
Clothes are maybe even more powerful than titles because they're so visual and so immediate. There's a classic study by a psychologist named Leonard Bickman.
He had a guy on a street corner asking people to do weird things.
Exactly, like pick up a paper bag for him or go stand over by a bus stop sign. And the variable was what the requester was wearing.
Sometimes he's in just normal street clothes, other times he's in a uniform.
A security guard's uniform, badge, cap, the whole thing, and no surprise, way more people obeyed when he was dressed as the guard.
But the really interesting part, as I remember it, was what happened after he gave the command.
Yes. The compliance held even after the guard walked away. He'd say, you pick up that bag, and then he'd turn and leave. And people would still do it. The authority of the uniform lingered even when the person was gone.
This sounds exactly like that bank examiner scheme the source describes. A classic con that works entirely because of clothes.
It's a really nasty scam, and it usually targets older folks. A man knocks on your door. He is dressed impeccably. A conservative 3-piece business suit. He just radiates respectability.
He looks the part of a bank official.
And he tells the victim that he's a bank examiner, and he suspects a teller at their branch is stealing money. And he needs their help to catch the thief.
Oh.
He asks them to withdraw all their savings in cash so they can trace the serial numbers or something. It's a ridiculous story.
But the suit sells it.
The suit sells it. The victim withdraws the cash. Then later, a uniformed bank guard shows up at their house to collect the evidence and return it to the vault for safekeeping.
And the guard is just the first guy's accomplice.
Of course. The victim hands over the cash, the guard leaves, the examiner leaves. And the money's gone forever. It's purely the power of the business suit and the guard's uniform.
Speaking of business suits, there was that jaywalking study in Texas.
The Pied Piper effect. Yeah, a 31-year-old man crosses the street against a don't walk sign.
When he wore normal work clothes, a few people followed him into traffic. But when he wore a crisp, tailored business suit...
3.5 times as many people followed him into oncoming traffic. They literally risked their own lives to follow the lead of the suit. They just assumed he must know what he was doing.
Okay, but the scariest study that involves authority in clothing has to be the estrogen experiment. We talked about the rectal earache, which was darkly funny. This one is not funny at all.
No, this is the one that gives hospital administrators nightmares. Researchers wanted to see if nurses would knowingly overdose a patient just because a doctor on the phone told them to.
So what was the setup?
A researcher calls a nurse's station on a real hospital floor. He identifies himself as a hospital physician, but he's a total stranger to the nurse who answers the phone.
Okay.
And he orders her to give 20 milligrams of a drug called estrogen to a specific patient on her floor.
And there were 4 very clear reasons why she should have refused that order.
4 huge red flags. 1, taking a prescription by phone was against hospital policy. 2, the drug estrogen was unauthorized. It wasn't on the hospital's stock list. 3, the dosage was obviously a dangerous overdose. The bottle of the drug clearly stated that the maximum daily dose was 10 milligrams. The order was for 20.
And 4, the doctor was a complete stranger. Just some voice on the phone.
Right, so you have a stranger on the phone ordering you to give an illegal overdose of an unauthorized drug. What percentage of real nurses do you think obeyed?
Now the answer, and it's still shocking. It was 95%.
95%. They went straight to the medicine cabinet, got the drug, which was a placebo, of course, and were walking to the patient's room to administer the overdose before a secret observer stepped in and stopped them.
That's terrifying. 95% just, they unhooked their own professional training. They ignored the giant warning label on the bottle. They just went, click, because the voice said, this is Dr. So-and-so.
The researchers concluded that in that situation, the nurse's professional intelligence wasn't even functioning. They were just in an automatic response mode. It shows that in a hospital setting, the title doctor is basically a command to stop thinking for yourself.
Okay, we've done titles and clothes. Let's hit the third symbol from the source. Trappings. These are the status symbols, right? Jewelry, and especially in America, cars.
Oh, yeah. The American love affair with the automobile. We treat our cars like extensions of our own self-worth. So researchers in San Francisco did a study on driver aggression at a stoplight.
I love this one because I experience it every single day.
The setup was simple. A car just sits at a green light. It doesn't move. The question is how long until the person behind them starts honking?
And the variable was the type of car that was blocking the intersection.
Exactly. Sometimes it was an older, beat-up economy model. Other times it was a brand-new luxury car.
Okay, my gut reaction, my honest prediction, would be that people would honk way faster at the luxury car. You know, that get out of the way, you rich jerk mentality.
And that's exactly what a group of students predicted when they were asked. The men in particular were sure they'd lay on the horn for the luxury car, but reality was the complete opposite.
What actually happened?
With the old economy car, almost everyone honked. Pretty quickly, too. A couple people even rammed its bumper.
Seriously?
Seriously. But with the new luxury car, 50% of the drivers waited respectfully behind it and never honked at all. They just sat there patiently until the car decided to move.
They were intimidated by the status symbol of the car.
It's the aura of the trapping. Just like the professor's title makes him seem taller, the luxury car makes the driver seem more important, more entitled to our patience. It shows how much we underestimate the pull of authority symbols.
So we're surrounded. We've got lab coats, business suits, PhDs, fancy cars.
Yeah.
They're all triggering this click, we're obedience in us. The big question then is, how do we defend ourselves? We can't just start defying every doctor and police officer. That would be chaos.
Exactly, and the source is very clear on that point. We need authority. Experts are usually right. We don't want to resist the whole principle of authority. We just want to resist the undue influence of authority. We need a filter.
And the main strategy is to remove the element of surprise, to just be aware that this power exists, and then to consciously ask ourselves two questions when we feel that pull.
Right. Question number one is this authority truly an expert?
Which seems so simple, but it's really powerful. It forces you to look at the person's actual credentials versus their relevance to the current situation.
Exactly. Take the Robert Young Sanka commercial. If you ask, is this authority truly an expert? The answer is no. He's an actor who played a doctor. He has no medical expertise. It separates the symbol from the substance.
Or the jaywalker in the suit. Is he a business expert? Maybe. Is he an expert on traffic safety? Definitely not.
So that question diverts your attention away from the shiny symbols and onto the actual evidence.
Okay, but what if the answer is yes? What if it is a real doctor or a real financial advisor with proven credentials?
Then you move to question number two. How truthful can we expect this expert to be?
Because even legitimate experts can have their own agendas.
Absolutely. Even if they know what they're talking about, are they being honest with you? What is their incentive in this situation? We're much more easily persuaded by experts who seem impartial or who seem to be arguing against their own self-interest.
And that leads us to the final and I think the most sophisticated part of this whole discussion, the sincerity maneuver. This is how the real pros hack our trust.
This is just brilliant in a devious kind of way. The idea is that a compliance professional will establish their honesty by seeming to argue slightly against their own interests on a minor point.
To prove that they're trustworthy for the major point.
Exactly. You see it in classic advertising slogans. Listerine, the taste you hate 3 times a day.
Or Avis, we're number 2, but we try harder. They're admitting a small flaw to make you believe their bigger claim.
And the master of this technique, according to the source, was a waiter named Vincent. He worked at an expensive restaurant and made way more in tips than any of his colleagues.
What was the secret?
It was this truthfulness con. When a big party was ordering, he'd wait for the first person to order and then he'd stop them. He'd lean in and say something like, I'm afraid that dish isn't as good as it could be tonight. Might I recommend the alternative dish instead?
And the alternative dish was always cheaper.
Always. Just by a little bit, maybe 50 cents. But the psychological effect was huge. First, he seemed to be arguing against his own financial interest by recommending a cheaper item. Second, this instantly established him as both knowledgeable, he knew it was good, and honest. He was looking out for the customer.
So the whole table just completely trusted him after that.
Completely. And that's when he'd do the upsell. Once that trust was established, he'd say, would you like me to select some wine for the table or recommend the most expensive desserts?
And because he was now this demonstrated expert of proven sincerity, they said yes to everything. And their total bill and his tip just skyrocketed.
It's a masterclass in manipulation.
It reminds me of that other story, the used car trap. A guy wants to sell his car for $3,000.
Right, and the used car dealer tells him, no, you should ask for more, ask for $3,500. The dealer seems to be arguing against his own profit, which establishes trust.
And then the dealer uses that trust to slowly chip the price down way, way below the original $3,000 through a series of fake collapse deals and other tricks.
It's the long con, and it works because we are so programmed to trust an authority figure who seems to be acting against their own self-interest, even for a moment.
So let's try to bring this all home. We've covered a ton of ground here. We started with Milgram showing us that 2/3 of us would probably shock a stranger into silence if a guy in a lab coat told us to.
We talked about the train crew who sued the man they ran over because they were just following orders.
The nurses who were ready to overdose a patient because of a phone call from a doctor. The power of suits and titles and luxury cars to just switch our brains off.
It's a pretty sobering picture. Authority is a necessary tool for society, but it's also a very dangerous click war trigger for us as individuals. We are very easily duped by the symbols.
The big takeaway here seems to be vigilance. When you feel that internal pressure to obey, you have to pause. You have to force yourself to ask those questions. Is this person really an expert? And how truthful are they being right now?
And watch out for Vincent the waiter. Watch out for that little sincerity maneuver.
Absolutely. The goal isn't to become some kind of paranoid rebel who ignores every stop sign. The goal is just to keep your brain engaged. Don't let the symbol of authority replace the substance of reality.
Well said.
So I want to leave our listeners with one final thought to chew on. We talked about that estrogen study where 95% of nurses were about to overdose a patient because a voice on the phone said, "This is Dr. Jones." And it's really easy for us to sit back and judge them.
But you have to apply it to your own life. If a person in a reflective safety vest waved you into a restricted construction area, would you walk right in?
If you got an email that looked like it was from your CEO asking you to transfer funds urgently, would you click send without triple checking?
If a financial guru on TV wearing a $1,000 suit told you to buy a stock that was crashing, would some part of you be tempted?
If a fake doctor on the phone can get 95% of trained nurses to nearly overdose a patient, and a man in a suit can lead a crowd of people into traffic, where else in your life are you following a uniform off a cliff without ever stopping to look at the person who's wearing it?
That really is the question, isn't it?